Welcome back. Pakistan has rejected India's allegations as a pretext to seek a 50% reduction in Islamabad's High Commission staff in New Delhi. At a press briefing, Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Farooqi dismissed New Delhi's accusations that Pakistan was violating the Vienna Convention. She said these are India's attempts to divert world's attention from its growing atrocities in occupied Kashmir. Farooqi said India will be better advised to focus on its internal and external issues rather than creating diversions at the cost of peace and stability in South Asia. The spokesperson condemned the unabated extrajudicial killings of youths by the Indian forces in the occupied valley. She said the Organization of Islamic Countries has rejected India's attempts to change the demography of occupied Kashmir. Indian troops have martyred 2 more Kashmiris, raising the toll to 40 this month so far. The civilians were martyred during a cordon and search operation in the Sopore district. Police said the operation is underway in the area. Meanwhile, in another operation, the Indian troops arrested half a dozen youths in different areas of the Budgam district. Indian authorities in the occupied territories have sharply increased despite the COVID-19 outbreak. The occupied valley has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 326 days. A U.S. State Department report says Pakistan has taken significant steps to counter terrorist organizations and terror financing. It said there were fewer terror attacks in Pakistan last year compared to 2018, thanks to the counter-terrorism operations launched by the security forces. It also acknowledged Pakistan made progress towards meeting the requirements of the Financial Action Task Force. The report also hailed Pakistan's positive contribution to the Afghan peace process. Talking about Afghanistan, it said the country continues to experience aggressive and coordinated terrorist attacks by ISIS's branch. Meanwhile, China has asked India to strictly observe and implement the consensus reached with Beijing during talks earlier this week. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said India should work with China and take real actions to restore peace and stability in the border areas. At a media briefing, Zhao said the incident in the Galwan Valley in the western section of the China-India boundary has received much attention. He said the Indian border troops crossed the line of actual control first and started provocation. Zhao said the Chinese and Indian foreign ministers agreed to cool down the situation on the ground as soon as possible. He said both sides also agreed to strictly abide by bilateral agreements reached so far. Now, the Afghan government says it has killed 25 Taliban fighters in an airstrike in northern Balkh province, but the Taliban claim Kabul's strike resulted in 4 civilian casualties. Balkh province's governor spokesperson said the security forces targeted a gathering of armed men. He emphasized there was no report of civilian casualties. However, a Taliban spokesman said 2 children and a woman were among those killed in the strike on Khas Balkh district. He said the civilian houses were completely destroyed in the government's raid. The Taliban have denied responsibility for abducting a leader of the Sikh community from Paktia province. In an interview, Taliban spokesman Suhail Shaheen pledged to punish the kidnappers of Nidan Singh. The statement from the group came 3 days after Singh was kidnapped in Chamkani district of Paktia. Shaheen said the Taliban's goal is to put an end to foreign occupation. He said the group will find Singh's kidnappers and send them to their court as per the law. Earlier, the relatives of Singh said they received abductors' call from Afghanistan claiming they were part of the Taliban. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, the number of deaths from the new coronavirus has surpassed 3,900, with 148 fatalities in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry said over 4,000 cases were reported overnight, bringing the total to nearly 193,000. The ministry said over 3,500 people recovered from the virus in the past day, raising the tally to more than 81,000. The ministry said over 107,000 cases are active in the country. It said the province of Punjab reported the most new infections with 1,602 cases. Sindh province reported 1,161 infections, while the capital Islamabad registered 115 infections. Latin America continues to be the epicenter of COVID-19 as Brazil records 1,185 while Mexico reports 947 deaths overnight. Worldwide, the death count has crossed 482,000 while cases exceed 9.4 million. More details in this report.
After an apparent downward trend, a second wave of COVID-19 infections in the US, Germany, South Korea, Australia and China has sent alarm bells ringing. In Latin America, the virus has been spiraling out of control as Brazil's death toll nears 54,000 and Mexico's tops 24. Meanwhile, New York, New Jersey and Connecticut have issued an advisory of 14-day quarantine for people coming in from states with high infections. COVID-19 hospitalizations and caseloads have also hit new record highs in more than half a dozen states of the U.S. Florida saw a record increase of over 5,500 new cases, along with Arizona, California, Mississippi and Nevada also having the highest surge.
I mean, what we're seeing in Florida is really rapid transmission in that 18 to 34 age group, and you're seeing a lot of cases come up. And granted, they weren't being tested at this level a couple months ago, but I also think they're testing positive at a higher and higher rate. So clearly, you have a lot of spread there.
Australia has sent troops to Melbourne, the country's second biggest city, to tackle COVID-19 cluster after it reported 33 new cases. But Prime Minister Scott Morrison says he is confident Australia can move ahead with easing restrictions as it can respond and deal with the outbreak. The World Health Organization, however, has warned the world faces a shortage of oxygen concentrators amid surging cases.
We expect to reach a total of 10 million cases within the next week. This is a sober reminder that even as we continue research into vaccines and therapeutics, we have an urgent responsibility to do everything we can with the tools we have now to suppress transmission and save lives.
MPs from South Asia are calling on leaders of the ASEAN to do more to help migrants, particularly Rohingya refugees. Meanwhile, China has increased daily nucleic acid testing capacity to more than 300,000 samples a day, compared with about 40,000 previously.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Washington has imposed sanctions on 5 Iranian ship containers for delivering oil to Venezuela. In a news conference, Pompeo said the ships delivered around 1.5 million barrels of Iranian gasoline and related components. He warned mariners against doing business with the Caracas government of President Nicolas Maduro. The Secretary of State said the U.S. continues to support Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido. The curbs are part of U.S. efforts to deter Iran's support for Maduro, who last month defended the right to freely trade with Iran. The U.S. has formally asked the UN Security Council to extend an arms embargo on Iran beyond October. In a virtual briefing, U.S. envoy for Iran, Brian Hook, said the Security Council should be united over its concerns with Iranian arms transfer. Hook said the Council has maintained arms restrictions on Iran since 2007. A State Department statement said Hook briefed the Council on the full range of Iran's malign activity. The statement said that Iran has neither abided by current restrictions nor demonstrated a change in its threatening behavior. Earlier in an interview, Hook threatened Russia and China of UN isolation if they will block a U.S. bid to extend a weapons ban on Iran. Meanwhile, Tehran says Iran and Venezuela will not back down from countering unlawful American sanctions. In a tweet, Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesman Abbas Mousavi said the U.S.'s desperate moves against Iranian signal failure of Washington's pressure. Venezuela's Defense Ministry Vladimir Padrino said U.S. Navy operation near its coast is an act of provocation which will get a thumping response. While in a statement, U.S. Southern Command spokesperson Colonel Amanda Asbuick said Navy's operations were intended to preserve maritime navigation. Meanwhile, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has offered a referendum to authenticate his popularity and rule.
pueblo recoge las firmas.
In 2022, on January 10th, the time period opens for those who want to collect signatures to call for a recall referendum against President Maduro. They will be free to go out to the streets and request signatures from the people. And if the people collect enough signatures for a recall referendum, like the Constitution demands, will go to a recall referendum to be measured at the ballot boxes, and it will be the people who decide.
¿Quién pone? ¿Quién quita?
Moving on, the Saudi-led coalition has deployed war monitors to oversee a ceasefire between government forces and southern separatists in Yemen. The monitors arrived in the southern Abyan province, where fighting has taken place between the two parties. Earlier this week, the coalition announced the ceasefire and said talks will take place soon in Riyadh. Coalition spokesman Colonel Turki al-Maliki said they will urgently work to bring back political and military committees to help make the Riyadh agreement last. Tensions had risen recently between the Yemeni government and the Southern Transitional Council on the island of Socotra. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said it is up to Israel to decide whether to annex settlements in the West Bank. Speaking to reporters, Pompeo said extending Israeli sovereignty was a decision for them to make. Pompeo's comments came after senior aides to President Donald Trump met for a second day to discuss giving Israel a green light for the annexation. Yesterday, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged Israel to abandon annexation plans. He said the annexation will constitute a most serious violation of international law and grievously harm the prospect of a two-state solution.
I urge Israeli and Palestinian leaders to commit to meaningful dialogue with the support of the international community. I encourage regional and international supporters of the two-state solution to help bring the parties back to a path towards a negotiated, peaceful settlement.
It's time for a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back now. U.S. President Donald Trump says he will sign a defense cooperation agreement with Poland's President Andrzej Duda. This comes after Trump hosted Duda at the White House for the first time since the coronavirus pandemic led to a global shutdown. In a joint news conference, Trump said last year both countries signed two declarations to increase security collaboration. Duda also welcomed the new agreement, saying it's very important to European security and to Poland's security in particular. He said there is a possibility more U.S. troops will be sent to Poland than agreed on previously. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has called for the reopening of the border with Pakistan. While receiving the credentials of new Pakistani envoy Rahim Hayat Qureshi, Rouhani urged promoting bilateral ties in all spheres. Tehran state media said Rouhani also called for the implementation of bilateral agreements. While Pakistan's ambassador Qureshi said that ties with Tehran are of great importance to Islamabad. He said Pakistan will continue supporting Iran in the international arena. The votes on amendments to Russia's constitution has begun in all the 14 administrative regions of the country so far. Eastern Federal District. The ballot on reforms will go on for 7 days and can clear the way for President Vladimir Putin to stay in the Kremlin until 2036 if re-elected. Russia's easternmost regions of Kamchatka and Chukotka were the first to begin the vote. The Regional Election Commission said voting is underway in 816 polling stations in Yakutia region as well as in Buryatia, Transbaikal and also Moscow. Authorities say they have taken all necessary safety precautions amid the pandemic. On March 11th, the Russian State Duma approved the final reading of the constitutional amendments bill proposed by Putin. In the United States, hundreds of protesters have occupied space outside New York City Hall to demand a $1 billion cut from the police department budget. Protesters said they will continue occupying City Hall Park until New York PD's $6 billion budget is reduced. City's Mayor Bill de Blasio has pledged to cut police budget. Blasio said City Council intends to ensure safety with fairness and justice. Meanwhile, police chief in Tucson, Arizona, has offered to resign after he released a video showing custodial death of a Latino. This follows weeks of protests demanding police departments to be overhauled, defunded to stop officers killing unarmed people of color.
To demonstrate my willingness to take accountability for these mistakes, I am offering my resignation to the mayor, city council, and city manager, which they can accept or handle as they deem appropriate.
Now, a Republican bill to rein in police misconduct in the aftermath of George Floyd's death has failed in the U.S. Senate. Democrats denounced the measure as flawed and defeated a motion by a vote of 55 to 45. The civil rights leaders and activist group also opposed the measure. The legislative fight now moves to the House of Representatives, which plans to vote on a Democratic bill today. Senate Republicans warned the failure to advance the legislation can mean a political stalemate. Floyd's death in Minneapolis sparked weeks of protest and stirred strong public sentiments for stopping excessive force by the police. In the US, President Donald Trump's administration says top Chinese firms, including telecom giant Huawei, are controlled by the Chinese military. This was revealed in a document of Defense Department which lists 20 companies operating in the US allegedly backed by the People's Liberation Army. The list also features video surveillance firm Hikvision, China Telecoms, China Mobile and AVIC. The list will lay the groundwork for US financial sanctions against the firms. Pentagon's designations do not trigger penalties but can lead to imposition of sanctions, may include blocking all property of listed parties. White House has already taken several steps against Chinese firms, including barring US companies from selling them certain technology without permission. The Special Prosecutor's Office in The Hague has indicted Kosovo President Hashim Thaçi for alleged war crimes. In a statement, the prosecutor's office said the accused is also responsible for nearly 100 murders. It says Thaçi and 9 others also face charges of torture, persecution and enforced disappearances. The officials described the indictment as a result of a lengthy investigation. The office said the former Speaker of Kosovo's Parliament, Kadri Veseli, has also been indicted. Less than a year ago, Kosovo's Premier, Ramush Haradinaj, resigned after he was summoned by the same court on suspicion of war crimes. Now in Congo, clashes between protesters and police have escalated. Police fired tear gas to break up violent protests outside Parliament over proposed changes in the judiciary. The change in laws will transfer responsibility for prosecutors from the tribunal to the Justice Ministry. The demonstrators, some armed with petrol bombs, blocked traffic outside Parliament in Kinshasa, creating barriers and burning tires. The protesters were mainly motorcycle taxi drivers and supporters of President Felix.
Fight to the end to protect the independence of the judicial system. Etienne Tshisekedi, President Felix Tshisekedi's father and UDPS founder, told us to take responsibility, so we sent our members to the parliament to vote for us.
United States Energy Information Administration says the country's crude oil production increased during the week ending June 19th. EIA's data showed last week oil production increased by 500,000 barrels per day and averaged at 11 million barrels per day. Oil prices fell noticeably after data showed another weekly increase in U.S. stockpiles. U.S. West Texas Intermediate price shed over $2 to settle lower than $38 a barrel on the New York Mercantile Exchange, while Brent crude oil sank over $2 to close below $40 a barrel on the London ICE Futures Exchange. European stock markets are trying to recover after failing over IMF's further cut in global economic growing forecast. Investors are pushing a freshly rally over hopes of revival of economic activity as most of the regional countries have eased lockdown restrictions. Frankfurt's DAX is trading nearly 1% higher. German airline Lufthansa stocks climbed 13.5% after its major shareholder backed nearly $10 billion government bailout. CAC 40 in Paris has recovered fractionally after falling hard, while London's FTSE 100 is trading flat. In Asia, Seoul's Kospi led the losses, closing over 2% lower, while Nikkei 2 to 5 lost. Now it's time for the weather updates. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can always follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.